Good morning. I'm Pastor John Osborne, and this is the Poughkeepsie, New York Seventh-day Adventist Church. And I wish to welcome all of our viewers on churchpond.com who are watching us live on the internet this morning, and a hearty welcome also to our faithful viewers on Cablevision and Time Warner and Trinity Broadcasting Network. Well, this morning we are in part 2 of our 8-part sermon series on the 7 churches of Revelation. And today we are dealing with church number 1, and the title is Ephesus, the Church Without Love. There are many interesting comparisons between the modern city of New York in America and the ancient city of Ephesus in Asia. Ephesus was a seaport city. It had a magnificent harbor, and many ships from many places from around the world, from the then known world, came to the harbor of Ephesus. And of course, New York is also a seaport city, and big ships come from all over the world. But listen to this. Ephesus was one of the most cosmopolitan and prosperous of all the cities of Asia. And that means that Ephesus was the most trendy and stylish and cutting edge of everything. And if you wanted to be where it was happening, you went to Ephesus. And doesn't that kind of sound like New York City? Now, my brother Dave pastors a church in California. And we kind of have this East Coast, West Coast thing going. And if I really want to just light him up like a Christmas tree, I'll weave into the conversation somewhere about New York City being the capital of the world. And he will just go off like a Roman candle and start ranting, the only people who think that are the people from New York. I've never heard that before, that New York City is the capital of the world. The only people who think that are the people from New York. Why, you people from New York are a legend in your own mind. He's so predictable and he's fun to watch. But outside of my big brother David, everyone else on earth knows that for all practical purposes, that since the 20th century, New York City has been the capital city of the world. And the ancient city of Ephesus was the second largest city in the then known world, second only to Rome. And about a mile outside of the gates of the city of Ephesus, there was a magnificent structure, and this glorious building, which was then one of the 7 wonders of the world, was the magnificent Temple of Diana. Now, you know, sometimes when we read about these churches and these places of antiquity, we need to be careful because we get the idea that these places were little places. You know, they were small. But folks, when you begin to study all of the things that took place there, you become aware of the fact that these are large metropolitan cities indeed. And when you read about the Temple of Diana, you find that this was no small structure, but it could hold over 20,000 people. It had 60-foot ceilings. Now, the Temple of Diana was used for a variety of things in addition to religious purposes. And when I say religious purposes, I'm using that term loosely because it was really nothing more than, how do I say this nicely, a glorified house of ill repute. But this temple also became a banking center because many of the kings of those days brought their treasures for safekeeping to Ephesus. At the same time, though, Ephesus also became a refuge for criminals. You're still seeing the parallel with New York City? Ephesus was also a place where people came to carry on all kinds of deviant religious extremes and debauchery. And as I mentioned last Sabbath, orgies and temple prostitutes and all types of perversion were all part of these religious services in these pagan temples. And many of those in the early Christian church had just recently come out of this type of thing. And this is why Paul was so emphatic about the Christian women then not cutting their hair like the temple prostitutes did, and being sure to cover their heads when they were in the temple so that the new converts from pagan worship would not be tempted or confused about who those women were in the church and why they were there. You catch my drift? But the church of Ephesus has another rich history, and that's the one in the Word of God. And you will find the information given about the church of Ephesus there in Acts chapters 18 through 20. And the church there had some wonderful leaders. The Apostle Paul ministered into the church of Ephesus, and he later wrote a letter back to them. And for about 3 years, Paul had a ministry in the city of Ephesus. On one occasion, he writes to the church over in Corinth, and he says to them, recorded there in 1 Corinthians 16, 8 and 9, I will tarry at Ephesus until Pentecost, for there is a great door opened unto me. But then he closed with these words, and there are many adversaries. And when you study Paul's missionary journeys, that was true almost every place he went. And nobody seems to have made enemies faster, except maybe Jesus, than Paul could. I mean, everywhere Paul went, people hated him. And many times, if God had not sent angels to protect him, an angry mob would have killed him. And I'm not going to soft pedal this thing. And you people watching on television, well, you might as well know, as my church members do, that there are a lot of people that don't like me because I'm a very plain-spoken pastor. And I say what I feel needs to be said, and the chips have to fall where they may, and people either love me or they hate me. And there's a whole lot of people in this area that love me. And there's a whole lot of people in this area that feel differently about me. But you know something? It was exactly the same situation with the Apostle Paul. And I dare say it, but it was the same way with Jesus. You either loved him or hated him, and it's the same way today. You either love him or hate him. There's no middle ground. And you know something? You show me a pastor that everybody likes, and you show me a pastor that is just a nice, happy, jovial guy that everybody loves, and I'll show you a spineless wallflower, people-pleasing pastor that can't make decisions and who hardly gets anything really substantive or worthwhile accomplished. And all he is mostly talk, and he talks a whole lot about doing stuff, but actually getting it done, But you show me a pastor who is not afraid to stand up to sin and evil doing in the church and won't put up with any foolishness. And you show me a pastor who has enthusiasm and moves forward and actually gets things done in the church. And you show me a pastor who is trying to conduct some type of aggressive soul-winning endeavor. And I'll show you a pastor who has a lot of people who don't like him. And a lot of people who grumble and complain about him. And that's exactly the way it was with the Apostle Paul. He was an aggressive, no-nonsense guy who got things done. And there were people who loved him. And there were also people that hated him. Everywhere he went. Oh, I know, Pastor John. All those pagans and all those heathen adversaries that fought Paul, it was just terrible.